Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 290, Dricus Du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker via second round TKO in the shocker of the night. What a performance. And I've already done a full card post-fight for UFC 290, which I will link down in the description where I talk about every single fight. But I felt like Du Plessis' win over Robert Whittaker was so monumental to the middleweight division that it deserved its own in-depth video. And I went back and watched Du Plessis versus Robert Whittaker, and the more I started to think about how this fight played out, I believe Dricus Du Plessis was exposed by Robert Whittaker at UFC 290, and I believe the reverse is true as well. Robert Whittaker was exposed by Dricus Du Plessis at UFC 290 as well. We're going to talk about what I believe in both those cases, and it may not mean exactly what you think, but I want to dissect the fight at first because I feel like a lot of people, I haven't seen a whole lot of it because I haven't been paying attention to online over the past 12 hours because I've been too busy making videos and then sleeping when I'm not making videos. But I feel like a lot of people are going to make excuses for why Du Plessis was able to get it done against Robert Whittaker, because the narrative going into this fight was that Du Plessis had absolutely no chance against Robert Whittaker. I myself said, look, I think it would be a fluky win if somehow Du Plessis gets it done in this fight. I do not still believe that. We're going to discuss that in this video. But you go back and you look at this fight, and in the first round, Robert Whittaker was winning this fight. He was winning from the outside. He was landing good shots. It was kind of close. Don't get me wrong. It's not like Robert Whittaker was blowing him out. Robert Whittaker got a takedown. Du Plessis countered with a guillotine that essentially helped him get up. And then when they got back to their feet, Whittaker was pumping the jab and really just kind of hitting the guard of Du Plessis. Then after that, in the first round, Du Plessis got a head and arm throw or trip, whatever you want to call it, took Robert Whittaker down the last minute of the round and beat him up badly with elbows and even started to look for a Darce choke in that exchange as well. And Du Plessis clearly won the first round. There's no doubt about that. He won the first round. Then in the second round, it started off like the beginning of the first round. Du Plessis landing some shots, landing some good body kicks, landing a couple good leg kicks. But you see Robert Whittaker kind of peppering him from the outside, blitzing forward, beating up the guard of Du Plessis. But it's kind of close. It's kind of competitive, a lot more competitive than a lot of people would think. And then you see Du Plessis catch him with a nasty jab that literally basically flash KOs Robert Whittaker. He was kind of out. He dropped to a knee. He was basically a statue. He kind of gets back to his feet, and he's just running away from Du Plessis. And Du Plessis, he has an unbelievable killer instinct. And the guy has so much heart, it's unbelievable, an unbelievable killer instinct as well. And he just starts chasing down Robert Whittaker. He realizes, this is my moment. I can get him out of here right now. Chases him down, squares up his hips, just starts throwing crazy combinations at Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker eventually retreats up against the fence. He starts smashing Whittaker up against the fence, landing nasty body shot, just melts Robert Whittaker and then smashes him as he's curled up on the ground and finishes Robert Whittaker in the second round. And this is one of the most shocking upsets we've seen in recent UFC history. Pretty much nobody saw this coming. And I know there's a lot of people out there saying, oh, I knew Du Plessis was going to win. I picked Du Plessis. A lot of these people were just kind of memeing. They were like, oh, Dricus is going to get it done. Dricus is going to beat Robert Whittaker. They didn't really actually believe it. They just thought it'd be kind of funny. And they wanted to be on the side like, oh, yeah, I picked him. They didn't actually believe it in their heart that he was going to win. The majority of people thought Robert Whittaker would win this fight. And this was a shocking result. And now this has earned Dricus Du Plessis a shot at the middleweight title. It's most likely going to go down at UFC 293 against Israel Adesanya. And they had that whole post-fight altercation in the cage afterwards that was so cringy. If you want to see me make a dedicated video on that as well, probably tomorrow, let me know down in the comments. But I feel like a lot of people are going to attempt to make excuses for some reason why Du Plessis won this fight. That Robert Whittaker was injured, or Robert Whittaker is aging, or Robert Whittaker, for whatever reason is on the decline and it was a fluke victory. I don't think this was a fluke victory at all. I think Du Plessis got the job done, and his style isn't aesthetically pleasing at all. His style isn't the most technical, but he finds a way to get it done. I've talked about this with Merab Dvalishvili. I've talked about it. The style isn't aesthetically pleasing. The style doesn't look all that great, but it doesn't matter because it's effective. John Jones doesn't have Alex Pereira-esque striking or Israel Adesanya-esque striking, but his striking is considered elite because it's effective. And that is what Dricus has been able to do in the UFC. He's been able to be effective. It doesn't matter how the skill set actually looks. You may look at him, he's like, oh, he's squared up his hips and he's just sprinting forward with his chin up in the air, throwing combinations. It does not matter. It doesn't, because he's effective. He just beat Robert Whittaker, who was considered the second best middleweight in the world that nobody thought he'd be able to beat. And he proved himself. He proved himself at UFC 290 that he is a legitimate contender in the middleweight division. I mean, it's just crazy to me. I'm still shocked, and this is kind of a post-fight breakdown as well. I am so shocked, and I know there's a lot of people who like to clown predictions. Oh, you said Robert Whittaker would have to slip one a banana peel, and you said it would have to be a fluke for Dricus Du Plessis to win. Yeah, because that's what I felt like going into it. I'm not going to lie to you and say something other than what I believe. You can't get everything right. And on top of that, look at the information we had going into this fight. We had a Dricus Du Plessis who had a competitive fight with Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson was winning the first round, eventually gets stopped, gassed out in the second round. Brunson was out striking him and out grappling him in that first round. Then you had the fight against Darren Till. Darren Till borderline almost finished him in the second round. I know Du Plessis 10-8'd him arguably in the first round, but Darren Till had a lot of success. Brad Tavares had a lot of success. I'll never forget Du Plessis trying to take down Brad Tavares, with some type of lateral drop and just ending up straight on his back. Even you go back to the Trevin Giles fight. Du Plessis was losing the Trevin Giles fight, arguably, before he got the finish. You go back to his UFC debut against Marcus Perez. Marcus Perez was clearly winning the striking exchanges before Du Plessis KO'd him. So you look at all those opponents, and you're like, oh, he's having trouble with those guys? Well, what's going to happen when he gets in there with Robert Whittaker? What's going to happen when he gets in there with one of the best middleweights in the world? I myself have said, look, I don't favor Du Plessis against most of the top 15 of the middleweight division. Look at the run he's had. Derek Brunson should be retired. Supposedly, he might not be retiring anymore. His last two fights, his corner threw the towel in because he was exhausted in the second round. The fight before that, Darren Till was always massively overrated. Darren Till's not even in the UFC anymore. That's how bad he is, and has no cardio and no takedown defense. Then you go back to Brad Tavares. I arguably thought going into the Whittaker fight, the Brad Tavares win was the best win of Du Plessis' UFC resume. And it's just crazy to me that Du Plessis had more trouble with Brunson, Till, and Tavares than he had with Robert Whittaker. But we have to give the guy his credit. We have to consider him a legitimate contender. And at this point, and I said this going into this fight, if Du Plessis beats Robert Whittaker, all bets are off for an Israel Adesanya fight. If he can beat Robert Whittaker, it's reasonable to believe that he could dethrone Israel Adesanya. So we have to give him his credit here. I understand in a way, and this fight has really baffled me because in a way, Du Plessis, this was clearly his best performance and he looked amazing, but in the same way, he looked horrible. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's just the truth. That's how I feel about the fight. I don't know how to further articulate it. The striking still doesn't look all that great. The cardio looked fine, and I think the cardio issues were a bit overblown. I know people are going to say, oh, two-nostril Du Plessis, new mythical fighter. I think that was kind of overblown from the beginning because he looked exhausted. He even looked exhausted in this fight, to be honest. His mouth was still wide open. He was breathing heavily. He was eating shots from Robert Whittaker, but he was still able to go out there and get it done, and he was able to do that in previous fights too when he looked exhausted. So I think that was a bit overblown. But what I think this fight really came down to was a power differential. I believe that is the true difference between Du Plessis and Whittaker. Du Plessis has a size and power advantage. Whittaker was landing shots, and don't get me wrong, I will say Du Plessis improved with his striking defense. He was shelling up very well, absorbing a lot of the shots from Robert Whittaker on the forearms. He ate some stiff jabs, he ate some good counters, but for the most part, a lot of Robert Whittaker's offense was landing on the guard of Du Plessis. And I think the main difference here was just a power differential. Du Plessis, when he landed one shot, when he landed one body kick, one leg kick, you were getting a big reaction from Robert Whittaker. And when Whittaker would land combinations, Du Plessis a savage. He was just eating it. He was just eating it. It kind of reminded me in a way, and this isn't a great comparison. This isn't exactly the same. But if you go back to Paulo Costa versus Marvin Vettori, I felt like Paulo Costa was landing these big shots on Marvin Vettori, but the way Vettori was just able to eat them with basically no effect was the difference in the fight, where Vettori was landing big shots on Costa and getting bigger reactions out of him and doing more damage. And that's kind of what happened in this fight. Du Plessis' power and his size and his strength and his willingness to engage, he did not care at all. He will eat a shot to land a shot, because guess what? Whittaker landing 2 shots on Du Plessis, is nothing compared to Du Plessis landing one shot on Robert Whittaker. I mean, he literally dropped him and basically flash KO'd him with a jab. That's the kind of power Du Plessis has. And then on top of that, another not stunning, but another thing that we can compliment Du Plessis on is his jiu-jitsu. When he got taken down, immediately started to lock up that guillotine. And had he been able to get guard, I mean, Whittaker addressed it immediately past guard, but had he been able to get guard, that guillotine was deep. That guillotine was very deep. And then when he got Robert Whittaker down later in the first round, he was immediately looking to lock up Darce chokes and immediately looking to find a finish. So Du Plessis is a well-rounded fighter. He is a very well-rounded fighter. I'm curious to see if he can go 5 rounds. I'm very curious. That's still a massive question mark. But we have to compliment this performance. We have to give credit where credit is due. And I know a lot of people like to point the finger and say, you were wrong, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to make excuses for why I made a wrong prediction. If I could go back in time, I'm making the same prediction regardless. It doesn't matter. It wasn't due to any bias by any means. It was due to what I saw on paper, what I watched, my analysis. I had to go with Robert Whittaker. It only made sense, and I was confident in it. So why would I tell you guys anything other than me being confident, which a lot of you guys were as well. And I know a lot of people just love pointing that finger. I don't think truly, I think there is a very low percentage of people that actually believed going into this fight that Du Plessis would find a way to get it done. And I just really believe that if you're making excuses for why Du Plessis got this done, if you're saying it was a fluke, if you're saying Robert Whittaker was this, Robert Whittaker was that, I just think, you're just trying to devalue the win of Du Plessis. And I think that's, in this case, there's not really a way to do it. I just don't buy it at all. I don't buy it at all. We have to give the guy his respect. I talked about this. I was live streaming when he got the finish. Give this man his respect. He might not have the most aesthetically pleasing, skill set and the most beautiful striking or beautiful grappling, but he finds a way to use it effectively and win fights. He's on an unbelievable winning streak. He's undefeated in the UFC, and now he's a legitimate title contender against Israel Adesanya. And to beat Robert Whittaker in this capacity, who's melted Robert Whittaker like this ever? He literally melted Robert Whittaker into a ball. Who's ever done that? Who's ever done that? The only guy to finish Robert Whittaker at middleweight since he moved up to middleweight was Israel Adesanya in the first title fight. So we just have to give him his respect. We have to appreciate this win, and we have to appreciate the skill set, even if you're not a big fan on how it actually looks in the fight. Now, in terms of Robert Whittaker, and I believe that Du Plessis exposed Robert Whittaker here, and this isn't me making excuses for Robert Whittaker, but what this really told me here, and in retrospect, it's easier to see, hindsight is 20/20 always. I think Robert Whittaker's been fighting in the wrong weight class for a long time. Robert Whittaker is by no means a big middleweight. He used to fight at welterweight. And you go back and you look at a lot of his fights, he hasn't finished a fight at middleweight since Jacare Souza back in 2017. And Jacare Souza wasn't a big middleweight either. So it's been 6 years since he finished a middleweight, which is crazy to me. He finished Derek Brunson back in 2016, so we're talking 7 years ago. But at middleweight, he wasn't a finisher. And he was always undersized for the weight class. And I think this Du Plessis win really hits that home for me in terms of Robert Whittaker's overall career, because he beat Marvin Vettori. He just outclassed him in the striking and just beat him to a decision. The Israel Adesanya fight, I know people think he won the rematch. I don't think he won the rematch. He got outstruck in that fight, but that really didn't have anything to do with size. The Kelvin Gastelum win. Kelvin Gastelum was kind of the same size as Robert Whittaker in that fight. Guess where Kelvin Gastelum's fighting in his next fight? He's fighting in the welterweight division. The Jarrett Cannonier fight. Whittaker was winning that fight, got dropped in that fight, I think in the 3rd round. In that fight, you could clearly see a size differential. The Darren Till fight, Darren Till, another former welterweight, similar size as Robert Whittaker. So I honestly do believe Du Plessis, at least to me, maybe other people have been thinking this for a while, Du Plessis exposed that Robert Whittaker needs to be fighting at 170 pounds. I don't think he can be successful long-term anymore, at least. Maybe years ago, but anymore, I don't think he can be successful at 185 pounds. I never thought he was going to beat Israel Adesanya. I had no desire to see the trilogy. I'm happy that Du Plessis won in that respect because we get some fresh meat in the division. But I also think if Robert Whittaker continues to fight at 185 pounds, I think his career is over. I'm going to be honest. I know that sounds crazy and that's a little bit exaggeratory, but at this point, he just got chinned by Du Plessis. He just got brutally finished by Du Plessis. And I think a lot of these up-and-coming guys could beat Robert Whittaker as well. I mean, Robert Whittaker doesn't appear to be invincible anymore. At this point, I think Robert Whittaker could lose to Paulo Costa. I think Robert Whittaker could lose to a guy like Sean Strickland. I never thought that before. But now that Du Plessis was able to beat him in the capacity that he beat him, I feel like this borderline air of invincibility for Robert Whittaker is kind of gone. I think a lot of these guys can go out there, and Sean Strickland isn't the biggest middleweight either, so maybe that's not a great example. But I think a lot of these guys coming up can beat Robert Whittaker, and I just think at his size, it would make more sense for him to be fighting in the welterweight division, and I think he could beat a lot of those guys at welterweight, but I don't think he wants to cut the weight, but we'll see what happens after this fight. But I think truly, if he continues to fight at 185 pounds, I really don't think he's going to have a whole lot of success, especially considering the UFC is not really going to want him to continue knocking off contenders. We kind of seen the changing of the guard. Marvin Vettori, I know Jared Cannonier's been a while, but Marvin Vettori just kind of got exposed himself, got destroyed by Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier seems like he's making massive improvements, and I know the middleweight division isn't the best division. I know the middleweight division doesn't have the best contenders, and I know Whittaker can still be competitive, don't get me wrong, but I just think if he wants to have long-term success and wants to become a contender and wants to fight for a belt again, he's going to have to go down to 170 pounds, follow the lead of Kelvin Gastelum. Now, in terms of Dricus Du Plessis being exposed at UFC 290, because I 100% believe Du Plessis was exposed, and I know a lot of people are probably getting their panties in a wad for me saying that, but exposed for me is finding out something to the masses. You know, I've talked about it. Beneil Dariush got exposed by Charles Oliveira because people were overhyping and overrating Beneil Dariush, and then Charles Oliveira was able to destroy him in the first round, and a lot of people were shocked by that. And what I feel like at UFC 290, Du Plessis was basically exposed as a legitimate top contender. That's what was exposed at UFC 290 because he just went out there and beat Robert Whittaker. And I know I just said I don't think Whittaker belongs in the weight class. I think Whittaker is still very highly skilled, but when you're dealing with a size disadvantage and a power discrepancy, the way Robert Whittaker is dealing with it, it's not going to work that well. I would pick Du Plessis if he fought Robert Whittaker again. I know that sounds, it doesn't really sound crazy because we just seen him melt him, but going into this fight, nobody actually believed that Du Plessis was a legit contender. I know there's going to be a very few that's going to be down in the comments saying for sure that they knew Du Plessis was a legit contender. I would say 95% thought Du Plessis was kind of like a meme of the middleweight division. That's what they thought. He was exposed because most people did not even believe that. That's my point here. Did not believe that he was a top contender. And he was exposed as a legitimate threat to Israel Adesanya's middleweight title. I've said it multiple times in this video. All bets are off. If Du Plessis can go out there and destroy a guy like Robert Whittaker, he can beat Israel Adesanya. He can beat Israel Adesanya. I'm not saying I'm going to pick him over Israel Adesanya, but Du Plessis has a well-rounded game. You know, he's got good power. He's got decent grappling. He's got good jiu-jitsu. You know, he's got effective striking. I'm not going to say it's great striking. I think Israel Adesanya would have a field day countering him on the feet. But if he can mix all those facets together, he's a guy that could legitimately beat Israel Adesanya. And if you said that 2 days ago, if I would have said that 2 days ago, I would have thought I was insane. You would have never convinced me. If you would have told me 2 days ago that I'd be saying this, I'd be like, there's no way I would ever say that in a million years. So truly at UFC 290, Dricus Du Plessis' stock shot up. It went through the roof. And anybody calling this a fluke, anybody acting like somehow he fluked his way to a win over Robert Whittaker, they're just brainless. They're just brain dead. They're just biased for whatever reason, and they don't want to admit that they were wrong. That's probably most of the people who were saying, oh, Robert Whittaker was off. I do think Robert Whittaker looked a little bit weird in this fight, but when I went back and rewatched it, I think it was the leg kicks of Du Plessis that was really having an effect on him, because Du Plessis, he didn't land a lot of them. Like, it's not ingrained in your memory of how many leg kicks he landed. But when he landed those leg kicks, they were perfectly placed and they were really, really hard. And I think that kind of affected Robert Whittaker's movement, that's how his whole style is predicated on, that karate style movement with his hands really low. And then Du Plessis, once Whittaker started to slow down, Du Plessis was able to land those big power shots and stun him with a jab. I mean, when's the last time we've seen somebody get knocked out with a jab? Dominic Reyes, the dead corpse of Dominic Reyes versus Ryan Spann. That's the last time I remember. Maybe there's been another one. But if you're getting knocked out by a jab, either you have a serious chin issue or you need to move down a weight class. So Du Plessis, I cannot compliment his performance enough at UFC 290 to go out there against all odds, to believe in yourself, to be able to go out there and, you know, okay, Robert Whittaker's working you a little bit from the outside, but you still believe in yourself. You still are willing to rush forward. You're still shelling up well and avoiding a lot of the big shots of Robert Whittaker. And then to go out there and find a finish. Robert Whittaker's only been finished by Israel Adesanya at middleweight. To go out there and do that was very, very impressive, and I cannot wait to see him against Israel Adesanya. This is going to be a fun fight. This is going to be a fun fight. I don't care for the build-up all that much. Again, if you want to see that video about the post-fight altercation between him and Adesanya, let me know down in the comments. But let me know what you think of this whole entire situation at UFC 290, how Du Plessis upset Robert Whittaker. Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.